And all right, so we are going to be talking about uh, monitoring of FY22 grants today. Specifically, we will walk through the risk assessment, so how we decided to select which LEAs to monitor. We'll go through the timeline and highlight some important dates that you should keep marked on your calendar. We'll go through logistical information of how the uploading and transfer of different information and evidence will work, as well as some tips around that. We'll share some resources, and then we'll close out with a Q&A. So to start with the risk assessment, our approach this year, as those of you who participated in monitoring last year well may know, we decided to monitor all LEAs fiscally in order to cover the risk that was presented by the dramatic increase of federal grant funds through stimulus funding, and we did very, very limited programmatic monitoring. This year, our approach is to kind of swing back to, I think, what folks are a little bit more used to, which is one, we definitely want to make sure we're covering programmatic monitoring. And then since we did so much fiscal monitoring last year, but we do still have a lot of federal funds out there in the federal grants ecosystem, do some really targeted fiscal monitoring. So our approach was to really look at LEAs who had either had recent programmatic findings or LEAs that have not been visited at all for programmatic monitoring in the last 5 years. So the first, if we start, let me pull up a pointer. If we start at the very top left-hand corner, we first looked at all the LEAs and if they had programmatic findings in the last 3 years. Because there was such limited programmatic monitoring last year, that's the reason we're looking at the last 3 years as opposed to just 2 years. If there were findings, then your LEA was selected to participate in monitoring for this cycle. If not, we then looked at all the LEAs that had not been programmatically monitored at all in the last 5 years. If your LEA had already been pulled for programmatic monitoring in the last 5 years, then we took those out of the selection pool as well. And then for those remaining, we just looked at folks who met 2 or more of the below criteria. So reimbursement requests being submitted super, super late in the fiscal year, and a large portion of those requests being submitted very late in the year. Schools that have been open for less 5 years, LEAs with a school designated in the accountability framework. Those LEAs that are in the top 75th percentile of expenditures, so typically are larger LEAs, and LEAs that had issues with either submitting reports on time or with their application quality across multiple of our grant programs. So if 2 or more of these criteria were true and your LEA had not been programmatically monitored in the last 5 years, then you were selected for programmatic monitoring this year. Otherwise, you were not selected. So in the monitoring notifications that you received on May 8th, it does tell you what 2 criteria, or if you had programmatic findings in the last 3 years, like for what specific reasons your LEA was selected for monitoring. Right. So from there, we are going to go into this high level timeline. So as I just mentioned, your monitoring notification went out last week. You will be receiving your expenditure sample this week to follow up with that. You have until June 22nd to upload your mandatory evidence. Through July and August, you'll be uploading additional evidence if needed and potentially participating in interviews. And then the reports will come out between September and October. So preliminary report in September that you'll have an opportunity to respond to, and then the final report coming out in October. To hone in on the specific dates, so like I said, May 8th, you should have received your initial monitoring notification. On May 18th, tomorrow, your expenditure sample will be uploaded to Box. Like I mentioned previously, because we did such extensive fiscal monitoring last year, this year's fiscal monitoring will be very targeted. So the fiscal monitoring this year will only be on the ESSER grants, and it will only be the procurement indicators. So So accordingly, your expenditure sample will also only consist of procurements as well, from your ESSER grants. If you did not do any procurements off of your ESSER grants, then you will not have a expenditure sample. And for those indicators, the only things you would need to provide are documents that are not specific to a transaction. So for example, your procurement policy. Um, the next most important date, July 22nd. So this is the deadline to upload all your evidence into Box. Our team will be looking through that for a few weeks. And they may reach out to you with questions during that time. But on July 13th, you will receive a formal email that states any additional evidence that you need to provide and potentially an interview request as well if needed. The additional evidence is also only if needed. And then you'll have a couple of weeks until August 3rd to upload that additional evidence into Box as well. We use Box because it is a secure way to transfer information and files back and forth between your organization and ours. Sometimes there's some sensitive information in the files, and so we just want to make sure we're using a secure method of transferring the information. All right, so some logistics just to make sure that the monitoring goes smoothly. The first is on your notification that you received on May 8th, there was somebody copied on that email, and that person is your monitoring lead. So that is the person who will be reaching out to you, who you can reach out to with questions, and who will be coordinating all of your monitoring. I believe every LEA that was selected is being monitored for more than one grant. So instead of having, three different contacts for three different grants, you'll just have one monitoring contact. So just make sure that person has the right points of contact at your LEA to make sure all the information is going to the right people. The second is making sure that your staff has access to Box. Um, I think most folks should have access to Box because we use it fairly often. But if you have had some change in staff at your LEA, to get access to Box, all you have to do is go into the IDS All Staff collection and update that staff member, either enter them into the system or change their tag to either head of school, LEA data manager, and or LEA finance/grants manager, depending on what is most appropriate for their role with the LEA. Once you make that update in all staff collection, they should receive an automated email the next day that tells them how to access Box. The next is making sure you put the files in the right place. So every LEA will have two folders in their Box account. One folder labeled your LEA name to OSSI, which is where you should upload all your evidence because it is what you are providing to OSSI, to us. And then everything that we're providing to you, we will put in the other box, the OSSI to LEA box. So for example, your expenditure sample would be in the OSSI to LEA box. Within your Box folder, so within this LEA to OSSI folder, it would be really helpful if you could set up one folder for each grant. And then also for the files that you upload, you can use the naming convention of putting the indicator number in the front and then the name of the file subsequently. This organization system just helps us understand what documents are for what indicator. And will cut down on a lot of questions and confusion. We want to make sure the question that, if we do have questions and we're talking to you, they're more substantive questions and useful questions than where is this file or what is this file for. So if you can, please follow that organizational system and file naming convention. We would very, very, very much appreciate it so that we can find everything. If you do have a file that is applicable to more than one indicator, if you could upload it just multiple times and change the indicator number in the front, just so we know, this file is definitely applicable to however many indicators it's applicable to. We would also very much appreciate that. I forgot to mention at the beginning, since I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see my chat. And so if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them at the end of the webinar. But if you have put something in the chat, I'm not ignoring you. I just can't see the chat at this precise moment. All right, so here are the LEA points of contact for the LEAs that were selected for monitoring. So this is the person who you can reach out to if you have any questions and who will be reaching out to you with all formal communications and also responding to any questions you might have. You can also always reach out to aussie.monitoring@dc.gov. This is a general email inbox, but it is monitored regularly. And then, like I mentioned before, on our website, this recording as well as slides will be posted. And then any other resources, templates, etc., that we have will also be posted on the website. All right, and with that, we'll take some Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go to the chat. And I will give folks a little bit of time to process the information. And then if you do have a question, feel free to come off mute or just pop that question into the chat box. All right. If there are any questions, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all have a great afternoon. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.